Hello, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Gary Smith, and welcome to the Storm Count. So, today is Tuesday, March the 7th, 2017, which means we are just 6 days away now from the next update to the bans and restricted list for Magic the Gathering by Wizards of the Coast. And this is a fairly significant bans and restricted list update for two significant reasons. The first is this is the first mid-season ban they've had since the changes they made at the last bans and restricted list update, allowing an update to the list 5 weeks after the last Pro Tour, or the most recent Pro Tour, depending on your vernacular or vocabulary. Which is fairly reasonable because they've had decks in the past, they say, that they didn't ban at all because they didn't find out about it until mid-season, just before new decks would come in and push that deck out, or the decks would rotate, so there was no reason to ban because obviously a lot of the pieces would go out. And so this allows them to ban a deck mid-season if it's causing problems and stopping standard playability and other things like that. And that seems to be a big issue Wizards have been trying to solve recently. If you know, they did have like the standard showdown last season, and it's coming back for Aether Revolt. And it seems to be that was because a lot of people left the format over, things like Emrakul and whatever, which they banned. But it seems to be that that's not really helped anything, because the second reason this is a significant banned and restricted update is it seems it will be the second one in a row, not even a whole season apart from the last one, where we will get a banning for Standard. And that's fairly significant because Standard never really sees bans, and it's going to shake a lot of confidence in the Standard format. The last ban we had back in Aether Revolt was the first one in Absolute Ages, and I don't think they've ever had two bans restricted list updates in a row where they've never needed to ban, to ban something for Standard. If I'm wrong, then please correct me if you know better in the comments, but I believe that they never really had the situation in the past of needing to ban twice in a row for Standard, let alone only 2 months apart. This is fairly significant because it shows there's a huge problem in Wizards R&D, and that's something I want to talk about later in the video a little bit, maybe. But first, I want to kind of go into why we need a ban, what cards need a ban from the decks, and which decks need a ban and why, etc. And then I also want to go into, again, like the problem with Wizards R&D, but ultimately how I believe they can stop this problem going forward. So first up then, why are there decks that need a ban? What decks need a ban? What cards need a ban? So the problem at the moment is the format is dominated by pretty much 3 different types of deck. Mardu aggro, so Mardu vehicles, Mardu walking ballista, although that's pretty much Mardu vehicles with a couple of cards changed out for walking ballista. Green-black aggro, so that's like the green-black snake deck. That's all about doubling counters put on things, and just making huge creatures as quickly as possible. And you also then have the Saheeli Rai combo decks. Now, I'm not someone who believes that Saheeli Rai's been keeping decks out of the format. I know a lot of pros seem that way, and they say it stifles creativity, because what's the point of playing a deck that might just lose randomly to Saheeli Rai combo deck? But I would argue that any deck Saheeli Rai is keeping out, the green-black and the Mardu decks are keeping out even harder. Those decks are far more prominent at the top tables in tournaments, are far more prominent at tournaments of competitive nature, and quite frankly kill you in about the same speed as the Saheeli Rai combo deck. Sure, they can't literally just kill you on turn 4 like the Saheeli Rai combo deck can, but by turn 4 they can lock you out the game pretty hard. Either through just the sheer versatility of the threats, or the huge power and toughness on the board, and you just don't have a way to answer it. Let's take Mardu Vehicles as an example, really, because I believe that's the deck that needs to ban the most. This is an aggro deck that has none of the traditional weaknesses of an aggro deck. Yes, aggro decks are usually good against control in a lot of formats, but never has a aggro deck since I started playing the game, and in fact I look back over previous formats, I don't think I've ever seen an aggro deck quite the same in being able to just roll over a control deck with such significant ease. Yes, you can win with control, you can get the right answers at the right time, but don't you dare tell me that it's likely to happen or easily happening. That is very rare right now, that a control deck is beating the Mardu Vehicles deck, and it's easy to see why. the Marduk's vehicle deck not only has a bunch of threats that avoid sorcery speed removal, or wraths, because they're not creatures when the wrath comes down, it's able to really quickly recover from things like drawing dead cards, which normally Control capitalizes on, and aggro is weak to. Aggro is really weak to the whole drawing lands late game, because its threats normally are so individually weak, and it wins not through powerful early threats, but a huge volume of early threats. And now it's got a huge volume of early threats, but each of those threats is significantly powerful. Let's take a card like Thraben Inspector. It seems like a fairly weak card, but it's a significant card because it provides an artifact for the synergies of the deck. It allows you to draw a card in the late game to come out from underneath a flooding. But more importantly, it's just good because it crews a vehicle in the deck. So often is a pseudo 3/5 with lifelink when they've got Aethersphere Harvester on the field. It also just provides a 1 power attacker, and sometimes that's all an aggro deck needs. Or Toolcraft Exemplar, a 1 mana 3/2, which is significant in this deck because either it's hitting you for 3, or it's crewing a vehicle and hitting you for 4, or it's crewing you for a vehicle and hitting you for 3 in the air with lifelink. It's a fairly powerful threat. And then you've got cards like Scrap Heap Scrounger, a threat which not only crews every vehicle in the deck, but it's impossible to get rid of. The answers in this format, you have cards like Stasis Snare, and you've got the 2 mana sorcery burn spell that exiles it when it dies. But on a whole, either the control decks aren't running 4 copies of that burn spell because they can't afford to, because if it does, it then loses to all the other decks. But it also has a case of they sometimes just don't draw it, and it just keeps coming back and back and back and back. And that's fairly atrocious, really, for an aggro deck to have such staying power in the format. Never once have I seen an aggro deck, like I say, that's as versatile as Mardu Vehicles in not only winning the games, but also just staying into the games when it should be facing its weaknesses. Even mid-range can't beat the Mardu Vehicles deck because the removal's great. It's got Murder with Lightning Bolt attached to it, which is hugely significant, because that helps them end the game even when they're not drawing creatures that get it close. If they get you to 3, you can die fairly quickly. And they've got enough flyers that the aggro deck flies over the top of you, and that's normally a weakness of red. This is a deck that's red, white, black. Sure, white gets access to flyers, but not a huge amount. Again, like black does and red do, but none of those are primary in flying. And between them, you're not normally ever seeing aggro decks with a ton of flyers, and this one's got loads of flyers in it, and it's fairly egregious. Then you've got the green-black aggro deck that's able to, on turn 3, quite reliably, and I've seen it fairly often, have both a 4/5 and a 4/4 on the field, and that's ignoring any turn 1 play or any plays that go on later in the game. That's a fairly powerful deck. Right, now green-black actually does suffer the traditional weaknesses of an aggro deck, in my opinion. It does suffer the weakness of a board wipe actually wipes the board. It gets rid of all their threats. But the reality is, a lot of its threats are just so powerful on their own that one top deck threat wins the game on its own. The fact they're able to reliably run 5 drops and still effectively be an aggro deck is scary. Now, ultimately, I do think green-black, because of the way the deck works, needs the ban the least. I would rank it as Mardu Vehicles needing a ban primarily, followed up by the Saheeli Rai combo deck. And the only reason I believe the Saheeli Rai combo deck needs a ban is because Mardu Vehicles will get a ban. Once Mardu Vehicles is banned from the format, then I will agree that Saheeli Rai is going to be stifling creativity and going to be keeping decks out of the format. But my opinion is that any deck that can kill, needs to be able to kill both Mardu Vehicles and Saheeli Rai. And if you can kill Mardu Vehicles, you can kill Saheeli Rai. The threats that the Mardu Vehicles put up are significant enough that you need to be able to beat them. And if you can generally beat the Saheeli Rai combo deck, which is why I feel that it's not keeping any decks out of the format. So as I say, Mardu Vehicles is more prominent than Saheeli Rai. More people play the Mardu decks at tournaments. It does better regularly, which is proving it's the more annoying deck. And you have to, its threats kill you just as easy as Saheeli Rai. I mean, Saheeli Rai's only real trick over Mardu is killing you on turn 4 in very rare cases. It doesn't happen that often, really. Because any single removal spell in that situation, or even a shock, keeps you alive. But unfortunately, that's the situation we're in, really. If Mardu Vehicles goes away and decks change, well, Saheeli Rai will then be keeping decks out the format as well. So in that situation, if you're banning Mardu Vehicles stuff to make the format change, where it won't as long as Saheeli Rai's around, so you also need to ban something from that deck. And my personal choice would be Saheeli Rai, though I reckon Wizards will go for the Felidar Guardian. So what cards would I ban then? Because I've explained why the decks need a ban. So what cards would I ban? Well, I've already said Saheeli Rai from the Saheeli combo decks, and my reason for that is while it's a significant card in a Planeswalker, it does nothing outside of the Saheeli Rai deck. Whereas the Felidar Guardian does go well into other decks. It can go into decks with Panharmonica and value decks or other decks like that. And so I don't like the idea of banning a card which post-bannings could lead to more creative decks than Saheeli Rai will. So I prefer to ban that half of the combo first and foremost, even if it does decrease the value of people's collections more. For the sake of the format, I think the Felidar Guardian's better to keep around. And I love how people say, well, if it breaks stuff with its flicker, well, no, like having a flicker effect in standard's not going to break things. We've already got spells and instants and sorceries that flicker. Felidar Guardian's big issue is that it can go infinite. So as long as we ban the ability to go infinite, I have no problem with Felidar Guardian sticking around, and I don't think Wizards should either. So from the Mardu Vehicles deck then, what should we see banned? To say that's a deck I think that needs to see a ban first and foremost. Well, that's a lot harder. In fact, I don't think it's easy to pinpoint on just one ban. There's a lot of cards that cause issues. I think Heart of Kiran is the first one that needs to go, and the most likely one to just get a ban if they only ban one card from it. The Heart of Kiran causes so many annoying issues in the deck because it stifles other aggro decks, it keeps out control decks, and it shuts out mid-range decks. It's a 4/4 flyer for 2 that they can crew with pretty much every creature. In fact, they can crew with every creature apart from Thraben Inspector. And they can still do that if they have 3 Thraben Inspectors. So that's not a huge issue, really. Having one creature that can't crew is hardly a crime when they've got a bunch of creatures that can, including a creature that when it enters the battlefield scries 2, and it's already a 3/1 for 2, which is heavily efficient. If I was to ban another card, though, I could expect, Gideon, ally of Zendikar, to see a ban now. He should have been rotating with the release of Amonkhet anyway, and I think people would be fine to see him go. Banning him just before Amonkhet's not really a big issue. He's already had all his value in standard. It really is time for him to go, in my opinion. He holds back a lot of decks as well. In fact, he could be holding back a lot more decks than any of the other cards can, because a turn 4 Gideon often wins games as much as a turn 4 Saheeli Rai combo. Sure, as I say, it doesn't kill you on turn 4, but it generally does kill you. There's not enough good ways to answer Gideon and the token it provides and all the value that it has on the impact when you play it. It's just significant. And what would I see banned from Green-Black? I don't know. Ballista seems reasonable, although I don't think Ballista... In fact, I remember when I saw Ballista spoiler, and I just thought Ballista was never going to be that powerful. Maybe not banning Ballista, maybe banning the Snake is the issue, although Amonkhet does seem to have a -1/-1 counter theme, which makes the Snake a liability to play. So it could just be that Green-Black doesn't see a ban, because if the other decks in the format get banned slightly, or the format slows down a little bit because of the bans, control decks can go back to playing more traditional Wrath effects, so effects like Fumigate, which be a bit more reasonable, which will allow them to kill the Green-Black deck. And between that and Fatal Push, you have enough ways to really, in different control colours, to keep the Green-Black deck in check. So maybe no ban is needed there. So, we've talked about the decks, talked about why cards need to be banned, talked about what cards need to be banned. I also said I'd talk a bit about then why this is a huge failure for Wizards R&D. Well, for one thing, it's going to cause a huge erosion for trust in the standard. I already remember seeing the Reddit threads where people were saying, does a mid-season ban and the fact that adding a mid-season ban mean they're going to be more trigger-happy with bans in standard? Now, I don't think being trigger-happy with bans is a good stance to take. Mostly because I believe that Wizards, if they're doing their job properly, shouldn't need a standard ban. It's the only format beyond Limited they actively test for. There is no reason for them to ban for standard beyond they didn't do their job properly. And if they don't admit to that, well, okay. I think the big problem, though, I think the most significant problem with Wizards R&D in their testing is that they've been doing a lot of changing cards after testing, and I think that's what's caused every major issue. I know that for a fact from what they've said in design articles that Reflector Mage was changed after testing, and I believe they also said that was the same for Smuggler's Copter, that the final version of Smuggler's Copter, the one we got, didn't see any testing at all after it was changed. Basically, what happens was they tested it as part of the testing cycle for their internal Future League, and then when it didn't see any play in the Future League, after that phase of testing got stopped for Aether Revolt and Kaladesh, they decided to change it to try and push it to C play, but then didn't test it. So that has caused issues. And I think actually every major card that's seen banned, I mean, Felidar Guardian, I think they just missed, and I can't believe they missed that. Surely that should have come up in draft at least once when they do a lot of limited testing. And believe me, they do a lot of limited testing. In fact, sets, I think, are primarily designed for limited, and then secondly for standard nowadays, I think is how they do it. And you can see that with how awesome limited is. Limited is absolutely fantastic at the moment. I'm not begrudging them that. But I do think that they need to do a bit better testing for standard. And yeah, so pretty much the biggest problem is they just change cards without testing them, or not much testing, and they fail to see the problems that arise from those cards. And that's an easy fix. There's an easy fix for that, and that is don't change cards after testing, or don't change cards when you can't test them anymore. If you want to push a card to make it see play and it didn't see play in internal testing, then test it again after you changed it, because we don't want to see bans. I don't want to go 5 weeks after a Pro Tour and have my deck banned. Now, I'm fortunate because I play Control in Standard that I'm never going to see a Standard ban. Go back throughout history, look at how many, answers, control, like removal or counter spells that have seen banned, and the number is absolutely zero. In fact, only one control card, or two control cards, I think have ever really seen a ban in Standard, and that is Jace the Mind Sculptor and Stoneforge Mystic. And that was a fairly powerful control deck, but they didn't ban the answers, they banned the incredible powerful synergistic finishers. So yes, if Control ever got those kind of finishers, we could see bans, but I heavily doubt it we'll get those kind of cards again. For one thing, they seem to hate blue. I mean, don't get me wrong, I think that Torrential Gearhulk is an absolutely amazing finisher for control decks, and absolutely fantastic, and I'm grateful for what we get with that. But as a whole, blue seems to be the ginger stepchild of Magic R&D nowadays. I don't know why it is. Maybe it's because people don't enjoy counterspells. In fact, I know for a fact that a lot of casual players don't like counterspells, and they've admitted to that's why counterspells as a whole have been toned down in sets. It's why we got a 2-mana counterspell that's almost worthless in Standard, because it only makes them pay 2, which is very quickly dead. But more importantly, doesn't hit artifacts. Really, it should have just been Mana Leak, in my opinion. But hey ho. So that's one easy fix, anyways. Don't change cards after testing, or if you do change them. But another easy fix, and I think the most significant fix that needs to happen going forward, and they have recognised this problem, print better answers. And I'm not meaning strictly better answers. I don't mean Hero's Downfall, which I do actually think needs to be printed, or a card like it. But I'm not even meaning that you have to do something like that. Just print, like, archetypal answers. A card like Stony Silence would have been perfectly fine in this set because it only stops the vehicle side of the Mardu Vehicles deck. You get that on the field and you can start wrathing quite easily. Crew is an activated ability of the artifact, so you'd be shutting that down, which means vehicles never get crewed. And being Mardu, they have access to white, which means they have access to answering that. So it's not as if they can't do anything about you having a card like Stony Silence. Graveyard Hate, for example, would have been great and would have maybe prevented Emrakul getting banned. Pithing Needle, again, giving us something like Pithing Needle. You don't need an answer that just removes something from the board. We just need answers that are fairly narrow, because you can't answer everything at once with cards like Pithing Needle, but can answer the cards we care most about answering and give us a fighting chance as unique strategies. That's all they need to do, is better answers. And I think Wizards, only 2 years ago, 3 years ago, Wizards were doing that. You go back to Theros Standard, there were a ton of answers, not just in terms of answers for like Hero's Downfall, which was in Theros, or Thoughtseize, but we had Back to Nature in the core set straight after Theros. You know, destroy all enchantments, and that was even when they hadn't pushed enchantments that hard. All they had was Constellation to push enchantments, and that was barely seeing play. And I know because I played it. Not that Back to Nature actually stopped you as a Constellation deck, really. If you played right, that had no real effect beyond being a 2-mana Wrath once. And you only had to fight that against green decks, which admittedly every deck was pretty much because of Abzan. But very few decks actually ran that in the sideboard because of how few decks there were that were Constellations. So, you know, and ultimately they wouldn't cast it until turn 4 or 5 anyway, because that was when I'd have enchantments on. At which point, the only difference between that and a regular Wrath was it didn't hit their stuff, and they could play other stuff the turn they played it, which was significant, and I think it was instant speed as well, so it was a fairly significant card, but that just shows how much they were willing to hate on the strategy to keep it in check, even when it hadn't provably done anything to need the answers. So basically, Wizards, there are two things Wizard needs to do, and that is don't change cards without testing and print answers. And they've already recognised need to print answers. I think Fatal Push is an example, though I don't actually think that was designed after recognising needing better answers. I think that was just more pushed for modern than standard. It's really not what you'd consider a traditional standard answer because it only hits aggro, and it doesn't hit mid-range at all, whatever. So it's more what you would consider normally, I guess, a sideboard answer, because you don't need too many of those effects main board. Now, we do at the moment because a lot of threats are 2 mana or less, but in a regular format, in a healthy format, that would probably be more likely a sideboard card because of the amount of mid-range that would be seeing play. So hopefully you've enjoyed this video so far. I know there are a lot of people that actually won't agree with the answers thing. I know a lot of casual players think that we don't need better answers. And I will just finish with one final point, and that is that answers don't win games, threats do. I could have all the answers in the world, but if I don't have a threat, I don't win. Sure, if you don't have any answers and I do, my threat more likely to beat your threats. But hey-ho, you're likely to have more threats than me. So, you know, you only need one unanswered threat to win the game. I need an answer for every threat you've got to not lose the game, and I think that's a significant difference, and why I think it's fine to have pushed answers, especially ones, as I say, that aren't just universal destroy target creature on Planeswalker, but more hate particular strategies just in case that strategy becomes too dangerous. Because if it's a narrow answer, it means that we don't have, you know, it'll only see play when that deck's rising. You know, you can't normally waste enough sideboard slots to run it accidentally. You need to be expecting that to be your weakness or to have to face that deck. So yes, so thank you very much for watching this video. I do have other videos this week about Modern Masters 2017 to do as well. I hope you enjoyed it though. If you do, don't forget to give me a like and subscribe if you want to see more. I'm hoping to do more videos on this kind of style coming forward. So thank you very much for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.